Now is the time. A time you'll look back on. A time you adopt as inspiration. You will recollect this time. This moment, right now. Motivate yourself towards success. Overcome. Take over. The time is now.
Bruno. Evening, boys. How are you? You all right?
Not too bad, Richie.
A little bit under the weather, but like as I said to Daz earlier, we'll just soldier on.
Yeah, we've all had to do that recently over the last few months or so, haven't we? So it's, we'll plod on, as I like to say it. But anyway, look, 4 of us, 2 nights in a row. What's going on?
Hello.
It's fully loaded again. Bloody hell. But anyway, it's what happens when you put good content on the channel, isn't it, lads? Everyone wants to be involved. So
Absolutely.
the idea of this show was, over the weekend, I saw a tweet, I put it to the lads, and I said, look, this is going to be a fantastic talking point for a show. Let's get it together, see if we can get something on this week. And luckily, we've managed to put it together. Now, the tweet that I saw was from a guy called Toon Le Grump. And he basically said, is Bruno the best player you've ever seen at St James's Park? I suppose it depends on your age. He's top 5 for me. I'm 48. Now, because obviously we know, like, we're a channel, we normally do anywhere between hour and 3 hour shows, depending on what the topic is. We try to cut this down a little bit and make it a little bit more niche, so we could, make it viewable as not like a scene of the Lord of the Rings or something like that, which lasts days and days and days. So what we decided to do, because everybody wants to talk about Bruno, okay? How much he loves the club already. He worships the fans, loves playing at St James's Park. We love his work ethic and on all the effort he puts on the pitch, how he gets around the pitch. He pretty much covers every blade of grass. And also the fact he likes to help troll with his teammates or the members of the Premier League, so who take the piss out of his teammates. We love it. We love every single thing about Bruno. But going back to the question is, though, is he in the top 5 centre midfielders that Newcastle have ever had? Now, you go through the list of some of the fantastic names that were, and I'm going to mention a few here who represented the black and white shirt over the times while pretty much went since we've been alive. We've already included players that we've seen play in our era. So there might be some people who've played in the 70s, 60s, and 50s. Unfortunately, we never got to see them. Part of you might see the odd TV snippet and stuff like that, but you look at players like Jermaine Jenas, Lee Boyer, Nicky Butt, Scott Parker. We're talking England nationals here who haven't made it into the top 5. Local legend Lee Clark. You've got Joey Barton, Czech Tiote, Sissoko. You've got John Joe Shelby, Mohamed Diarmi, Joe Willock. You've even got Sean Longstaff, if you want to put him into that category, as being a quality centre midfielder for Newcastle. Some do, some don't. He splits opinions like Marmite. What can you do? But what we wanted to do is we wanted to give you our top 5 opinion. And do we believe that Bruno's the best ever to be centre midfielder at full stop, let alone in the top 5 Newcastle players of all time? So what we're going to do is we're going to go in reverse order from 5 to 1. Daz, we'll start with you. We'll go around the house on number 5 before we all get back to number 1 at the end. So Daz, you're number 5. Do you want to explain why you chose this person?
I do, Richie. But first, because I'm going to forget it otherwise, I think what we agreed on Twitter earlier, we're going to give a big shout out to Connor. Connor, we were talking to your dad earlier on Twitter, and he gave up judo practice tonight to come watch this show and watch us talk about Bruno and midfielders. So that is dedication. So big shout out to Connor from all the loaded boys.
Love it, mate.
Right. Number 5, to answer your question, Richie. I put in a big look at that big long list. Yes, Kevin Nolan is who I picked at number 5, and yeah, the chicken dance. Everyone loves that chicken dance, and he scored a few against Sunderland, and he's back in the day as well. And yeah, he was just a leader. I think I didn't look up the details about him again, but I think he came in under Sam Allardyce. But he's probably one of the best things Sam Allardyce brought to the club, but he, as well as being a great captain, a leader, he took people under his wing, under those wings there. One of your friends, Chris, Andy Carroll, Big Andy, wasn't Big Andy living with Kevin Nolan at one stage, keeping them grounded, and we got the best out of him in that time as well. But Kevin Nolan for me is just a class act. He made his name at Bolton, of course, and there was even talks at one stage that he was going to play for Ireland, but that never happened. But great servant for Newcastle, and so I thought, because he's a nice goal scorer midfielder, I put Kevin Nolan on my list, number 5.
Great shout, and for all the reasons that you said, Daz. Now, Pete, we'll come to your number 5. Now, the picture I went and got to, I thought was quite fitting, and you'll probably be able to explain why when I put it up. But you went for Kebab.
Yes. Johan Kebab. Depending on who says it. Johan Cabaye. Yeah, fantastic player. I think you're alluding to the fact that it's quite fitting because we're hoping to see our other centre midfielder do the business there on Sunday.
It wasn't actually, but the reason why, obviously, you're going off the Brazil outfit. It was the last time we won at Man United, and Cabaye scored the winning goal. We won 1-0.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. Well, the same point. We hope our current centre midfielder does that business on Sunday and wins us the game. But yeah, look, Johan Cabaye, a fantastic player. Didn't see him for as long as what I wanted to. 3 years or 2.5 years, depending on how you look at it. But I think 17 goals, 13 assists, something like that. Over the course of his time, he was just brilliant. Technique, free kicks, long balls, long distance goals. I always remember, I don't know if you guys remember when we beat Man United 3-0 and he scores that free kick in off the bar and he runs to the Gallagate. That picture will always be a memory for me because it was just a tremendous strike, and that really kind of took us on to when we finished 5th. I think a lot of people in their minds are a little bit negative towards him because of the way he left, but you got to admire the talent. He was a super talented player.
Yeah, I completely agree. He was a fantastic player while he was at the club, and he was part of that little resurgence when the Alan Pardew, when he was here and stuff. He was fantastic, and unfortunately he left. That's what it. Sometimes it happens with players and we idols, and I think the one good thing in regards to what we'll probably discuss quite a few times with the players that we've chose, some of them went on to other clubs. Some were fortunate that they may have stayed at the club and finished their career, but we're in a position now where we don't have to sell, players anymore. We can hopefully nurture them through when they'll want to stay with Newcastle. So, great shout at number 5 there, Pete, Johan Cabaye. Now, Chris, so you're done on your Everton top tonight. That's nice of you to see. You're true allegiance tonight, mate. And there's a Liverpool connection to your number 5 here. So do you want to go into the discussions of why you decided to choose this guy as your number 5?
See, I was going to make a joke then and say Dizzy a man, but you flew right out. So I didn't. So for me, boys, I had to pick Gini Van Alden because I looked back fondly from when he was at Newcastle, and there was a point where he was absolutely untouchable for us. I know that his nickname was Genie Van Home, because he only seemed to perform at St James's Park, but on the other hand, he wasn't with us all that long, was he? Was it just under a full season? Am I right in saying that?
Full season, full season.
Just the full season, yeah. So, I often think, what could he have become? And to be fair, the reason I've put him in is partly down to the career he's then gone on to have. I mean, if you look, when I think it was his second season at Liverpool, he was like one of their mainstays, and Liverpool did not want to let him go. When he ended up leaving, they did not want Gini Van Alden to go. And I think if you look at what Liverpool achieved while Gini Van Alden was there, that kind of says it all for me. So, albeit I know it was only a season, but as the fingers say there, any player who can score 4 goals from central midfield, I don't care who it's against, isn't a bad player. And for me, I put him in there because I think he was a real talent, and I think he's somebody who, if he'd stayed longer at Newcastle, a bit like what Pete said there about Cabaye, he could have been a legend. So that's why I chose Gini Van Alden.
Well, fun enough, the main reason why we thought you put him in to start with, Chris, because he can show what number you can count to for a start. But just before I move on to my number 5, I noticed that a certain member of the panel has a bone to pick with you regards this selection.
Oh?
Yeah, spanner in the works.
Okay, Christopher.
Oh, it is. I was wondering who it was. I was looking at you all thinking, what's this?
Christopher, right. Gini Van Alden. The question is, and look, people in the chat, you put your questions in as well. Is Gini Van Alden a centre midfielder? Okay, like this is the thing, because I put it out there and I was like, before you switched on, really, I was kind of like, I'm pretty sure he played the season as a number 10 and not
for Newcastle. For Newcastle, yeah.
For Newcastle, yeah. Obviously, he went on to Liverpool and played centre midfield and was brilliant there. But
I found the loophole.
Yeah, and that must be it. But I was just a bit like, oh, okay. Because I can't remember him playing centre mid. So that was the only thing that I raised. It wasn't necessarily with you. It was the system. It was the system. Because
no, I completely agree, Pete.
To be fair, there's people in the chat tonight that are putting David Ginola and one or two others that didn't play centre midfield. But I don't know. Are we being lenient? Are we not? I don't know.
Yeah, do you know what? To be fair, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here. I don't know whether it was Richie or Daz, but I'm just going to say it. Somebody put a big long list of names, and Gini was on that list. So I thought I took advantage. I seen the opportunity and I took the advantage. But yeah, no, I totally take your point, Pete. I think at the time, Chris, let me. Sorry, Daz.
If I had put John Barnes in there, would he be on your list tonight?
I'd have took the opportunity. Ian Rush, I'd have took it. But no.
Newcastle?
No, we're just talking about midfielders. Yeah, we just. If I said Ian Rush was a midfielder for Newcastle, but no.
He basically played there. He never ran. He never ran for us.
He didn't.
But no, I do take the point, and you're absolutely right, Pete. We, from what I remember, I'm pretty sure we played a 4-2-3-1 in that season with Gini, and Gini was the 10 behind the number 9, who I think was Mitrovic. So yeah, he didn't really play as the number 10, but obviously knowing the career he had at Liverpool, because if you remember, we were all shocked because Klopp just stuck him bang in the middle, and we were all thinking, why are you playing there? Play him as a 10. And then all of a sudden, he really upped it a notch. Probably not down to the position, probably down to the quality of players around him, in fairness. But equally, he performed incredibly well. And for me, as I say, I took that opportunity and threw him in.
Fair play.
Yeah, and to be fair, we got a good profit. I mean, Tom Dixon's just said in there in the chat how much we sell him for. I'm sure it was about 30-odd million we ended up getting from when he went to Liverpool, wasn't it? So
yes,
we made a good profit on him in the space of 12 months. So
was it 25?
Yeah, it was 25 because we were last. Sissoko was 30.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
How was that managed to happen?
Unbelievable.
We could talk about that all day.
Unbelievable.
Christ.
Just a quick one. Sorry to interrupt. Shout out to Barry. Connor's looked like Connor's very happy with the shout out. So great that you're watching, Barry, as well. And everyone, nice one. Get back to judo though the next day, Connor. Catch you some payback. Rich,
so I think it's my number 5 then. Now, the reason
Yes,
why
please.
I put this guy in is because he wasn't, as I said before, like in the green room before we started the show, this guy did one job, but he did that one job to perfection. He didn't do anything else. He wasn't outstanding goal scoring wise or an attacking threat, but he did his job. He knew what his job was, and he did it to perfection. And that guy's David Batty. I just thought he was an absolute wall. Nothing got past him. He broke play up fantastic. You know, it was just that all around just solid defensive midfielder. As I said, no frills. I think the only player that I can really remember in the last 10 years that we've probably had as a like for like for him as a comparison, not quite as good as a player, but he was in that role was probably Czech Tiote. You know, he was that midfield enforcer. And he, you know, the thing is though, right, he was never really dirty either, in my opinion. He was always strong and hard in the tackle, but he did it the right way. Do you know what I mean? And it was, he just wore his heart on his sleeve, and he didn't matter which team he played for, whether it was Leeds, Blackburn, Newcastle, England. He just wanted to play football, and he just, you know, he would come and just, he wouldn't. He was one of those people. He didn't care if he took the player and the man. He probably wouldn't get away with half the stuff he got away with now. If he was playing now, he'd probably be, you know, he'd probably have a few more red cards to his record. Like, but just that team, you know, that role he played in that 90s team under Kevin Keegan, it allowed a lot of other players to do what they needed to do in the attacking third of the pitch. And he, you know, they knew that where he would be, and they knew that he was there to break play up if something was to happen. So for me, he's probably the best centre midfielder that we've had in a single role, in my opinion. But that's my number 5, David Batty.
To be fair, mate, it's hard to argue it. It is hard to argue it. He was a fantastic player, David Batty.
Yeah, he was. And as I said, some of the lists are going to actually, you know, because obviously we've seen different players at different times, you know, I'm the oldest of the panel now, Mart's left, you know what I mean? So it's like I'm a 70s child. I've seen a few players that these lads haven't seen and stuff like that. But obviously we've lived through the majority of, you know, the watching Newcastle together. So there is a lot of overlap. But remember, where we've placed them in our top 5, it's literally just, you know, that's our opinion. So surely enough, we'll move on to the number 4 now. And Daz, you're first up. Your number 4, fantastic player, international midfielder. I know he's got a lot of soft spots with a lot of Newcastle fans for what he did with the shirt, and just as in he was as a bloke in general. And you went as your number 4 as Gary Speed.
That's right, Gary Speed, and then I've started to cheat now because I opened up Wikipedia at the same time so I can get all the stats. Yeah, so bought from your club, Chris, bought for 5.5 million by Kenny Dalglish from Everton, and scored 29 goals in 213 games. But he was just colossal. He was brilliant at getting his head on the ball, and take a free kick as well, if I remember.
Yeah.
If he could get it off Solana or Shearer, perhaps he might.
Yeah. But you know, his qualities was definitely getting his head in. A great midfielder, a great servant to Wales as well. He went on to manage Wales as well for a time. And very, very sad. His story, we all know the story. But yeah, no, he was just an inspiration. And I know when I did my all-time team before, I think I had Gary Speed on the bench. He didn't make my starting 11, but he was on the bench. But you know, in a centre midfield spot, class player, my number 4 spot.
Yeah, fantastic shout. And do you know what? I'll just leave the picture up for Pete to talk about, because Peter's put Gary Speed in at number 4 as well.
Yeah, had to be in there. Was very much an unsung hero for Newcastle United, and when I talk about Gary Speed, I specifically talk about his time under Sir Bob Robson, because he was the catalyst for me in why we were so good under Sir Bobby. You can look at his stats: 7 seasons, 27 goals, 14 assists for a defensive midfielder. That is fantastic. That's outstanding for a defensive midfielder to have that sort of goal return. And I think there was one or two seasons where he was close to getting double figures. So he was very, very good. But for me, going back to the Sir Bobby Robson seasons, his relationship with Kieran Dyer was critical in us playing Champions League football.
Yeah.
It was so good. I was lucky enough to watch him every week in, week out, and just watching the way in which he would just mop things up. So you talked about David Batty, Richie, and you're absolutely right. He was that hard as nails, brick wall like Tote. With Gary Speed, he was just as hard, just as strong, just as tough, but he had the elegance on the ball. He was able to move and shift the ball with his left foot really, really easily. He could play. He was a player as well as a battler. He had everything in his game. And to be fair, he could get forward and get a goal. With the amount of goals he scored in the air from corners, free kicks, he was one of them that was a real menace in the box. We talk about Sven Botman right now. Gary Speed was that for us in his pomp. And he was very, very good in that. But people didn't underestimated how good he was. And when he went to Bolton for 500,000, I remember saying to Lee when he moved, I said, we've made a mistake here. Even when we got Nicky Butt in, who came from Man United, that had come off a really good World Cup in 2002, and he was seen as this next big thing. I said we're going to miss Gary Speed because he was so critical, and people didn't see it until he left, and it just fell apart after that. He was the cog that kept everything going, and so for that reason, I just think he had to be in the top five. He was so good, and obviously, the day that I found out that he passed, we were decorating our new house, and you hear about this news about players all the time, but that was the one for me that gave me a real sinking feeling that day because of the fact that I followed his career so closely, and I knew how good he was. And he just seemed like a really top bloke as well.
Yeah, I've got to say, Chris, what I'll do is I'll do my number 4 as well because mine's Gary Speed as well. So
yeah, go for it.
It just makes sense. And I've got to reiterate pretty much every word that Pete's just said. For me, it was as I said with David Batty, he was that old school defensive, hard man midfield who did one job really well. Got to echo what Pete said. Gary Speed did that and the rest. But as he said, he had the finesse, he had the eye for a good pass. He was also very box to box as well. Do you know what I mean? You could make those surging runs forward, and as Pete said, he was able to pop it with a goal every now and then. He scored some fantastic goals for Newcastle over his time. And as we've also mentioned as well, he had a knack of getting on the end of corners and free kicks, and the amount of headed goals he had. You probably think from centre midfielder, you're probably not really going to get many more centre midfielders who are that good with the head over the period that your Shearers, your Ferdinands, and so, people like that. They stand out as being good. But the amount of goals that he got from midfielders was absolutely class. And as Pete finished on there, when obviously the sad news came through that he decided to take his own life, I think it hit a lot of Newcastle fans hard because yes, he wasn't from the area, but he gave a lot of his playing career to the black and white, and he walked as a lot of that. Probably every single player that we'll actually talk about in this our top fives, they wore that shirt with pride. They left everything on that pitch, and he was one of them. And the fact that Alan Shearer classed him was one of his closest friends says a lot as not just him as a player, but as a man as well. And obviously a huge missing. We've touched on this, and obviously we've got Shy Ben as one of our as our mental health partner and sponsor. It means so much to all of us. Seriously, if anybody ever feels like they need to talk to someone, go out and talk, because Gary Speed he's a fantastic guy. He had everything going for him at Wales, and you look at Wales' international football status now. All that started with the Gary Speed DNA of Welsh football at national level. Everything developed from there onwards. So Ryan Giggs inherited that. Even Chris Coleman. That all started after Gary Speed. He put the foundations at work, and all that success they've had over the last 10 years or so is all down to him. And it's just a shame that he felt as though the world was so much money. He had to take his life before it was, he needed to. But lads, look, Gary Speed, number 4 there, fantastic shout there from Daz, Pete, and myself. Chris, you didn't go for Gary Speed at number 4. You went for someone we've already discussed, and you know what? I don't think anybody would disagree with you, have him in this place as well. But you went for my number 5. You went for David Batty.
Yeah. So, Rich, I won't go into it too much because obviously, I know we've already touched on David Batty, but yeah, for me, I had to put him in. As you probably know, fairly recently did my all-time 11, and I thought, well, I don't want to end up with egg on my face, so let's just double check what my all-time 11 was. And David Batty was on the bench in my all-time 11, and I thought, you know what, he definitely deserves a mention. And again, without sounding like a cop out, I look at the fact that he's a Premier League winner with Blackburn, and I just think I think when he came into the midfield, and it's a bit of a shame really, because a lot of people associate David Batty as one of the main reasons why we didn't win the Premier League. Obviously due to that season where we blew the 12-point gap. But I try to forget about that when I'm thinking about David Batty, because I kind of think that wasn't his fault. Like he was brought into the club, and I think to blame him single-handedly is a bit harsh. Ultimately it's the manager who picks the team. And
now David John Cook.
Oh, why? What's
I think it's David John Cook. Yeah, no, David was fighting with me yesterday over David Batty.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on, Chris.
No. I just look back at the player he was, and for me, I felt like I remember when he came in, I always felt like Nicky Butt was like a poor man's David Batty. I thought David Batty had more to his game, if I'm honest. And what's interesting as well about David Batty, in case nobody knows, he was very much one of those players who came in, did a job and went home kind of thing to his family. Like he doesn't want the media spotlight. And if you actually think about it, and it's true, like David Batty just disappeared off the face of the earth when he retired. So you never hear anything of David Batty.
Yeah, nobody knows. No, I can't remember. I don't know whether we were talking about it before, Chris, way back with somebody, but somebody mentioned it might have even been Warren Barton when we had him on, but an ex-player talked about the fact that nobody hears from David Batty anymore. Nobody even speaks to him. He just literally just does his own thing. He just literally gone into his own life and separated himself from football, which you're right. It's crazy.
It's weird because when I remember when we started looking for guests for the show last year, and I actually got to speak to Barry Venison, and Barry Venison is very much the same. He says, look, I am so out of touch with football now. I couldn't do your show justice. But I'd happily come on and do it, but I just don't know what to talk about. I don't know who plays where now, what position. And it's like, as he said, he's took a complete backseat like David Batty and just left it. That's it. His work days are behind him on that front. He's got other stuff now. So
I wish Cabaye would do that.
I know.
And there's a few. He's only one, but I wish Michael Owen. Jesus Christ, just take him back. His daughter's more famous than him now. Just go on, just live your life.
And one last story to tell you about David Batty, and again, Pete, you will remember this because chances are you were on the show with me. But for anyone who hadn't heard what we were speaking about, some time ago. Apparently David Batty used to turn up to training late with his boots in like a plastic Tesco bag or something, and he'd literally throw his boots on, go into training, and he'd be 100 mile an hour, best player on the pitch, and then everyone would be like, oh, let's go to the pub, or let's do this, let's do that, and he'd be like, no, I'm going home, and then he'd just go home. He'd just turn up, give his all, go home. So I think he very much saw it as a job, but he gave 110% every time he was on the pitch, and he's very committed and a really good professional. So yeah, that ultimately that's why I put David Batty in, because I thought he was a really talented player, and he added a lot of bite to our midfield.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and obviously one of the reasons why I had him in my top 5 at number 5. So top 3, it's where it starts to get tight there, and you probably will see a few crossovers. So I'll be honest, I've just gone through the list as I'm sitting here as well, listening to everyone, and I tell you what, there's one person left out, someone really huge, and it's really, really thrown as to why. And I'm going to get round to it when the last person stopped talking about him. But Daz, Daz, we're on to you now. Daz, you went.
You're nervous now.
No. I don't think it's pick on Daz night tonight like it was last night, Jimmy. Wherever you are, if you're watching.
And I wore blue for Jimmy Smurf.
Yeah, blue for Jimmy. And you went for the midfield general, England international. That is Rob Lee.
Rob Lee, absolute legend. How could he not make the list? We all know the famous story we talked about before about the Newcastle is closer than Middlesbrough story when trying to convince him to come from Charlton up to Newcastle. But he was just phenomenal. Would score goals from very important goals as well. But I look back, he scored 44 in 303. That's what it says on Wikipedia anyway. But yeah, he was a great servant for the club. He was there for 10 years actually, and went on to Derby County and West Ham, Oldham and Wickham after that. But no, for us, he was just phenomenal, and he got England caps as well. And it was just like a mainstay in the team for so long. He has to be in everyone's list, or is he?
He's not.
Good point.
He's not.
Good point.
He's not.
He's not.
He's not. And the person's just realised as well, and it's quite funny.
I know it is. I just put it down into, I was like, I'm really interested to
I was like, I wonder who this is.
And then he drops it in the personal chat. It's me, isn't it?
And you have Hugo Vianney in there, and you don't have Rob Lee. What?
Hey, he should have been in the list. He
could have been.
If
he lived up to his potential, he would have been in our list for sure.
We're going off track here, but Hugo Viana, because a lot of people don't speak about him now, but he was he was European Young Player of the Year when Sir Bobby Robson signed him. You know what? He was signed because of his ability as a centre midfielder. Bobby brought him in and wanted him as an alternative to Rob Eyre on the left, and that's why we never got to see the ability. But when I think he had a few clubs, went back to Braga, played centre mid, and then turned into a world beater again. But another conversation for another time. But yeah, he could have been in it.
Yeah, he wasn't even in the conversation, was he?
No, not even in the long list that Daz drew up that you tried to copy everything from. So, no, but Daz, great shout at number 3, mate. Really understand why you put him in there. Now, Pete, come to your number 3. Now, this is someone who I think you're the only one who actually put him in your top 5. So I'm interested to find out why you put him in there. But I think originally he wasn't really bought as a centre midfielder, but he did play a lot there, didn't he? He was bought primarily as a winger, if I remember rightly.
I'm just
hang on a minute. What's going on here? Who's this?
No, that's it. Just you'll find out, Chris. But to be fair, he did play centre midfield for Newcastle. He didn't just play number 10 and then moved on to centre midfield later in his career at a different club. That obviously Chris watches pretty much more than what he does the black and white. So
John Kaisley knows. John Kaisley knows. He just put it in the chat.
Yeah, great shout. So, Pete, go into it.
David Kelly.
Kieran Dyer. And look, I'm just going to put this up on there because Jonathan Kaisley just put, please tell me you haven't all left Dyer out. No, Jonathan, we haven't. So he is in our list. And to be fair, on the revised list, I looked down the list, I was like, why is Dyer not even on it? He wasn't even on the revised list. So I was like, what's going on? But Kieran Dyer, look, a lot of people are going to allude to, and I get this out of the way, he was injury prone. He was certainly towards the end of his time at Newcastle and beyond that. But I tell you what, there was 2, maybe 3, 4 seasons, even with injuries, where he was an unbelievable talent. He was just so good. And it links to my 4th choice in Gary Speed, because watching those two play centre midfield from 2001, 2002 to 2004, 2005-ish, he was, those two as a partnership were undroppable. Now, we spent $5 million on Jermaine Genius, and he couldn't even get in the team. And he was a very talented player at that time. It was because those guys were so good. They were their yings to their yangs. Dyer could do everything going forward. We know about Gary Speed because we've talked about it before, but Kieran Dyer covered every blade of grass every 90 minutes he was on the pitch. He was like a Duracell battery, just didn't stop. And he would harass players. He was someone that would arrive late in the box. We talk about the Lampards and the Gerrards. He was good like that as well. Maybe he didn't get the goals, but he was good at helping the attack. Was technically very good, a good passer. And he had the ability that he was that good he could play anywhere. England played him right back for a period of time. He was that good and undroppable. And there was a period between 2001, 2002 to 2002, 2003. Those 2 seasons, there was a period where there was a genuine conversation about who was better between Kieran Dyer and Paul Scholes. And there was a genuine conversation about that. And, you know, you look at both of their careers and their careers of, you know, Scholes was unplayable in the top players. But for that period of time, he was unplayable. And he might not have always scored the goals or the assists, but he was so good and so effective for Newcastle United. I just couldn't leave him out. He was that good. I'll go through the stats. So in 8 seasons, he got 23 goals, but 32 assists. 32 assists is good. That's a good ratio. If we had Bruno Guimaraes in 6-7 seasons getting 32 assists, we wouldn't argue with that. If we had, you know, the likes of Johan Cabaye doing the same, Gary Speed, we wouldn't argue with that. That is a really good turnover of numbers, considering that even through his best periods, he was injured a fair bit as well. And I just beg the question, without injuries, how further forward could he have been? Could he have broke that midfield? Could he have been that one to play on the right-hand side to ensure that Scholes and Lampard played in the middle for England and took us into another level, or Gerrard and Scholes? Could he have been that guy? You know, they're all questions, you know, to look at, but tremendous, absolutely tremendous for Newcastle.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of people might not have put him in, because of his injury record, and why people don't think that. But also, as I said at the start, before you started talking about, he was actually bought as a winger originally, wasn't he? Before he moved more in centrally, wasn't he, Pete?
Well, he predominantly played on the right hand side of midfield, and to be fair, he did spend a fair chunk of time, you know, filling in for certain players on the right. If Solana was injured, if Robert was injured, he'd play on the left. You know, for England, he would play right back. He had the ability to play everywhere. And that's probably what was his downfall towards the end of his career at Newcastle. He became a bit of a utility player where he just kind of played anywhere just to fit him into the team. But for those 2 seasons in particular, from 01-02 to 02-03, he was fantastic. He was just brilliant, and a big reason why we played Champions League football and, you know, went to the latter stages of the Champions League. You look at the sort of the famous goals in the involvement. I always remember that final game where he takes the initial shot, and then Bellamy gets the rebound. It's just like he was involved in so many big moments for Newcastle. He's one of them that I just couldn't leave out personally.
Yeah.
Before Chris talks to us about Alan Smith, let's just focus on.
He wasn't on the list, was he?
No, definitely not. I don't think we've touched on the big moment as well in Kieran Dyer's career. The old punch up with Lee Bowyer in the middle of the park. That was something else.
You know what? It's one of them I just didn't want to remember, Daz. Which is why.
Sorry, Pete.
Yes, so thanks for that. I'll tell you what, actually, interesting, before we move on to Chris's number, for an interesting story, I don't know whether you know this, but while he was at Ipswich, he actually scored a goal with a fractured leg.
Wow.
I don't know whether you knew that. He actually got into a tackle. He just went on, you know, saw the physio, had a pain in the leg, made it through half-time, scored just before half-time, went off at half-time because his leg just got no improvement, had a scar. He'd actually found out he broke his leg in the first half. He'd fractured his tibia. So, little lesson fact for you. There you go.
Have you guys ever seen the video where he gets interviewed in the middle of Ipswich town centre, and like they're asking opinions on Ipswich, and they come up to him, they're like, "Oh, what's your opinions on Ipswich?" Blah blah blah.
Yeah,
they're asking him a question, and he's like, "Yeah, I know." He's like, "Oh, I play football." He's like, "Who you play for?" "Play for Ipswich."
Yeah.
Academy level? No, I played the first team. They're like, what? They couldn't believe it. They didn't even know he played. And that was probably about a year or two, maybe, I think, before Newcastle signed him. they didn't even realise that these reporters were interviewing him about Ipswich, and he was part of their first team and playing every week. It's just madness.
Actually, before we leave Kieran Dyer as well, hopefully he's. I know he's had some health issues there. In the
Yeah, I
last
was
while.
going to say the same, Daz. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully he's on the. I haven't heard the latest, but hopefully he's on the mend. But
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Right. So we're down to Chris Hall's number 3. Now, this guy has been mentioned already. So, Chris, discuss why you want to go for a second kebab.
You know what? I can't really expand much on what's already been said about him, other than the fact that you don't get called Dreamboat for no reason. Johan Cabaye. I always remember his song, and to be honest, I think it sends shudders down my dad's spine. That song, because I remember I was on. I forget whether it was a birthday or a stag do. No, I think it was a birthday, and my dad still reminds me of it now. So the don't sell Cabaye, Johan Cabaye. It was about 4:00 in the afternoon in Liverpool city centre, and I'd obviously had far too many to drink. I'm singing this song, going hell for leather on it, and then I decided as I was walking down the street, I needed a piss, so I decided to have a piss outside the WH Smith at like 4:00 in the afternoon on a Saturday. And he's going, Chris, stop it, stop it, stop it. I was like, I'm only be a minute. He's like, Chris, stop it. And then so like I'm in the corner by the thing, so he's thinking, oh, do you know what? Hopefully no one sees him. Get on with it, hurry up. And then I just started belting that song out. So then everyone was looking at me as I was pissing on the window with the Smith. So
thanks for lowering the tone tonight, Chris. We'll see you on away days on Friday.
Please on the meeting, just so you know.
I know it always reminds me of that Johan Cabaye, but
You're just lucky Martin isn't on here anymore.
I know he would have crucified. He's absolutely loved that. But no, being all serious now, Johan Cabaye, fantastic player. I don't blame him for joining PSG. I think that it was probably a dream of his. In hindsight, he shouldn't have gone. And I think he'll say that. In fact, I think he said it himself. I think he said, I should have stayed. I was adored. Yeah. And it's players like him who I hope, the likes of Bruno look at and think, do you know what? Maybe the grass isn't always greener. Coutinho, another example, going to Barcelona and then, ends up on the fringes and then ends up at Villa and whatever. So I think sometimes if you've got a good thing going, you should just stick with it. And the fans absolutely adore Johan Cabaye. And Pete said earlier on in the show when he was talking about him, that free kick against Man United, it was just sublime, absolutely sublime.
Even closer to home, I've got a question for you, Chris, but even closer to home for you, that goal he scored, that volley at Anfield, when Ben Arthur, I can't remember who the left back was at the time, but he rinses the left back, pops it to the back post, and on the half volley, he just pops it into the top corner. It's when Suarez scored that unreal goal and they ended up winning the game.
Was that the one that dropped down and he moved his shoulder and it hit there, and then he went round Colaccini? Was that game?
Yeah. That it was Suarez scored that goal.
Suarez scored that goal.
Put us 1-0 up by scoring that first goal.
I can't recall. I'll have to watch that back.
Oh, you need to watch that back. Unbelievable goal. But I wanted to ask you a question on Cabaye, because you talked about obviously the way which he left the club. And I was having a chat with D, the Palace fan, and he was kind of like laying into Newcastle about the fact that Cabaye prefers to come back to Palace since he left playing in England than Newcastle. And to be fair, he goes back to see them on the odd occasion. And I think PSG's academy, who he works for now, had a game against Palace like a few weeks ago, and he went obviously to that game. But do you think he maybe doesn't come back to Newcastle the way that other players do because of the fact of the way he left the club?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I think he Johan Cabaye, from what I remember, as I say, I remember reading that he regrets leaving, and probably a little bit like Gini van Aalden. Gini van Aalden speaks very, very highly of Newcastle, and he says how much he enjoyed his time there, how much the fans, he loved the fans, he loved the city, everything like that. And I think it's almost like a little bit of tail between his legs, like he feels a bit sheepish, and maybe he thinks, do you know what, like I shouldn't have left, kind of thing. And maybe he doesn't want to bring out bad memories as such in terms of the way he left the club, because right now, if he'd have stayed and been with us for a few extra years, who knows what he could have done? Do you know what I mean? And yeah, I would say it's that, Pete. I don't think it's for the love of Palace. I wouldn't have thought so anyway.
I didn't have him in my top 5 at all, but he was a good player, and like, I was sad. It must be that thing is still in my head, that the way he left us. And then Matthew Debussy, he left as well. He was like the best buddy, and not long after that, it was just kind of bad feeling with the way he left. That's why he didn't get near my top 5.
I think I'm sure we've mentioned this before, but I remember us speaking ages and ages ago about players leaving and going on to better things, and I think there's only like 2 players who've left in recent times. And when I say recent times, I'm talking like the last 10, 15, 20 years. Probably players in the last 10, 15, 20 years. The only 2 I can think of who left, and you thought, you know what, that was probably worth the move for you, was Shay Given, because obviously he went to Man City, and I understand why he left, even though he probably didn't want to. In terms of he wanted to stay, but the ownership just wasn't working. But he did well at Man City for the short period he was there. And then Gini Van Alden, because all these other players that we've mentioned, the likes of Cabaye, the likes of Demba Ba, who's also said he shouldn't have left. Not Gini Van Alden, Demba Ba, Matthew Debussy, Yohan Cabaye. There's very few players who you see move on and they go and do better things. You could argue Sissoko, I suppose. Even though we were happy for Sissoko to go, but obviously he got a Champions League final and stuff like that. But really, on the grand scheme of things, there's not many players who've gone on to do better things, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Mate.
Yeah, do you know what? Go on, Daz.
I was going to say,
I'm getting hammered for this phone getting on. Simon's had a go at me. Someone else has had a go at me earlier on. It ain't my phone. Don't blame me.
I heard water in the background there for a while.
Yeah.
I think someone should be allowed to go to a Chelsea game now. Pete, you see where I'm going here now? Yeah, turn that water off. Pete should be allowed to go to that Chelsea game.
Seriously, the feedback coming through those off the water is appalling.
Enjoy the game, Pete. Enjoy the game.
Enjoy the game. Yeah. Just to add in, by the way, guys, sorry, just last thing before we move on, Rich, I'll be quick. Yeah, you're quite right. It was me that didn't include Rob Lee in my top 5. I also didn't include him in my all-time 11. Now, the reason for that is not because I'm doubting Rob Lee in any way, shape, or form. A bit like what Daz said, I always remember that story. Funny, the one about him nearly joining Middlesbrough and Kevin Keegan condom and stuff. And it's weird because there's no reason why I shouldn't remember Rob Lee. And whoever I speak to, everyone waxes lyrical about Rob Lee, including you boys. But for some reason, from my childhood in supporting Newcastle, so obviously from being a young lad growing up, I never remember Rob Lee. I don't recall. I don't remember looking back. Like I remember Ginola, Robert, all these different players, David Batty. But for some reason, I never think, oh yeah, Rob Lee, and I don't know why that is. But so I feel a bit of a fraud throwing him in, thinking, well, everyone else loves him, so I love him, because in my heart of heart, I can't really recall growing up thinking, oh my God, Rob Lee's amazing. Don't know why. But
Chris, you don't have to apologise, right? We know you only started supporting Newcastle just before the lockdown, and you saw NUFC Matters TV. So look, it's all right that you've tried to go and you've went through all the archives and as much time. It's understandable you may have missed one out. So look, we'll let you off on that one, mate.
Yeah. Let one slip.
Is it because of the potential that you saw Newcastle going ahead of Everton? Just let's just be honest now. Is that the reality?
Don't start all this, boys, because you know what happened with Avon, and that's still sticking.
Yeah.
Just to make
we
it
haven't
clear
mentioned
to
it in
everybody,
ages.
I've always supported Newcastle, and I'm going to feel sorry for myself now. Growing up in Liverpool, all I've had is stick from about the age of 6 onwards. Everyone calling me Geordie this, Geordie that, Zebra, you name it, I got called it. I got
That's a good
yeah.
thing.
Well, it is, yeah. I like it now. But,
Look, Chris. At least we know that after the show, right? To console yourself, you can always go and give John Sinclair a console because he knows what you're going through. No, look, you can go and console yourself with him, mate.
He's going for it this week.
we'll go and talk about Man U or something.
Yeah, he don't know which team to support. Bless him. Coming into Sunday.
Oh. Right, just before we get onto the sponsors, right? This is where it gets controversial. Okay, it's my number 3. Okay, now people might have a go and stuff like that, right? I don't care. I'm being realistic. This guy not only has the potential to be the club's best ever centre midfielder, he has the potential to be probably one of the all-time greats to wear a black and white shirt. For me, it is all about consistency going forward. And that is Bruno Guimaraes. This lad...
Off. Get off. No. Let's show all about Bruno. And he's putting Bruno at number 3 in this list. What is that about? That's the last time I Ricky would lead off a show. No way. Not having that.
Thank you for joining me tonight. It's been a great show.
Bye.
Richie.
No, I've got to be realistic. You know what I mean? It's like, for me, it's he can be not just the best centre midfield Newcastle ever had. He could potentially be one of the best players Newcastle have had, full stop, in any position. For me, I think we've just seen a snippet of what he can do. And for me, it's all about him doing what he's doing now consistently over numerous seasons and taking Newcastle to the next level. That is literally the only reason why I've put him at number 3 below the 2 people I've actually put in there. You know, I know we're all going to wax lyrical about him because I know we've all got him in our top 5s. We know how much of a game changer is. And the fact that even someone like Roy Keane can turn around and say that it's been a long time that you can find a complete midfielder nowadays. Not one that, you know, like stereotypical, we might say a holding midfielder, or a number 6, number 8, and number 10, whatever you want to say. To have a complete midfielder who's proven, and with his stats this season, that he can play any of those positions. You know, he can break play up, the finesse balls, the way he likes to break through the lines, the fact he's now starting to add goals to his games as well, that, you know, to be worked on and training. And as Roy Keane, bear in mind, Roy Keane doesn't dish out praise for players a lot, let alone Newcastle players. It's, you know, that's going back a long time. But for someone to turn around and say that this guy has got something that not many players have got nowadays, and that's football intelligence. This guy has it in abundance, right? And that is the reason why I can see him being the best midfielder, if not one of the best players Newcastle ever had. But as I said, the only reason why I've put him at 3 at the moment is because he's been here, 10 months now. I just need to see it over a longer period of time for me, which, you know, even if at the end of next season, for example, if he's there and he's done what he's done now and more, he'll be number 1, full stop, hands down for me, even for just 2 years of his time. But at this moment in time, that was the only reason why would stop me putting him either in 2nd or 1st. So controversial or not, I don't know. I don't know whether you agree with us on that, guys, for my reasons putting him there. I don't know. But look, well, you can answer that one when you actually, you know, talk about it when it comes down to your turn. But just before we get into our top 2s, Daz, did you want to do the sponsors, mate?
Sure. I'll give a shout out to sponsors. Shout out to... What's wrong?
The flashy thing.
The flashy thing. Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here we go.
Yes.
And
I'll get them subscribing.
This has been on the system for 2 years, and Chris found it the other day. But yeah, this is our subscribe message. Thanks for watching, and a thumbs up to remind people to subscribe and like our videos. And you also have to remember to turn it off. That's the other trick. But yeah, so hit that like, hit that subscribe button. Especially if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. If you're already subscribed, don't hit it because you'll unsubscribe. Rightio. So shout out to shybarnes.com and Simon, who is, as ever, is always in the chat 99% of the time. He has a range of merchandise, including hats, t-shirts, hoodies. He also includes the loaded range, which is comprises of cups, bottles, t-shirts, the loaded t-shirt in a variety of different colors, and also the away days t-shirts in a variety of different colors. We have the Brazilian, Swedish one on display here. So yeah, that's the away days and t-shirt. So also shout out to Pins and Prints, and Dean has a range of pins and prints available, and we showed the one last night, the Almiron one. Here it is. The newest one to hit the range. Also, shout out to Machine House and the fabulous t-shirts that Marty has available, t-shirts and hoodies. So check out the latest there, and he's got new stock in, I think, as well. He's mentioned to us in a text before the show as well. So check that out. Always restocking and always changing as well. And then also shout out to the Geordie Rise, and a shout out to Dean there as well. And I see we've got Brett in the chat as well, and sorry, Oogie is there modeling the t-shirt, and that is from the Geordie Rise. So that's it for the sponsors.
Cool. Lisa, I know you've been in chat tonight. I did speak to Dean from Pins and Prints. I've passed him on the address. You'll be getting your print hopefully by this time next week. Obviously, there's a few postal strikes on the horizon, so hopefully that'll not delay getting it too soon. But it's getting printed tomorrow, and it'll be sent off straight to you. Right, the nitty-gritty, lads. Daz, number 2. Now, for your number 2, someone we've already discussed, a couple of us. But I wanted to know, obviously, your thoughts on why you put this person as your number 2, and that is David Batty.
Yeah, I said it last night, and I couldn't go change anything. No, but I always loved Dave Batty. I just love the way he just sat there. He mopped up. He won everything. No one got past him. I know David there in the chat is probably going to say again that he cost us the league, but look, he came in. He did a job for us. He was just solid, and I think when and I've talked to Andre actually about this a few times as well. For me, that defensive, I don't call it a defensive midfielder role. I call it the David Batty role. And for someone to have a role named after them, he kind of did exactly what it says on the tin. He was just class in that position. I know some teams play with that kind of a role today. Some don't, but for me, I always love someone there that could break down the play, stop it getting the kind of first line of defense before it goes to our actual defense, which always wasn't great in Newcastle back in the day. But so yeah, just absolutely loved him.
Yeah. Pete, I don't think you actually put him in your top 5. Do you want to give your thoughts on David Batty and Pops? Why he didn't make your top 5?
Yeah, David Batty was a good player. You guys have talked about him really well. He's that brick wall as you've alluded to, and he was solid as a rock. I can't help but get past the fact that it dismantled a really good partnership with Rob Lee and Lee Clark that potentially could have won the league. That's always kind of held something back from me. Kind of really probably appreciate him in the way you guys have done that. That's probably the big overriding reason why I don't have him in my top 5. Like I say, he was a good player, but there was elements of his game that we probably didn't need. Because we already had it. So you talk about the good on the ball, the elegance, the battler. We had that in Lee Clark already. I still struggle to find a reason why we signed him when we already had it, and it disrupted the flow. And I know I'm talking about one particular thing, but I think that one particular thing is why we potentially talk about our history very differently right now. And it's just something that's always held me back from really probably appreciating his abilities. But yeah, good player, no doubt about it. No,
fantastic, and valid points. You said one of the reasons why we love doing these shows on this channel is because it's all about opinion. At the end of the day, exactly. We've always said life would be pretty boring if we all agreed on the same things. You know what I mean? So there we go. Pete, your number 2. It's already been mentioned once tonight. He's my number 2 as well, so I'll follow on after you. But we both went for Rob Lee.
Yeah, good old Bobby Lee. You know what? I'm going to throw longevity aside because he spent 10 years at the club. But within that 10 years, he kind of, what I've got it here, he scored 44 goals, 41 assists. You're looking at nearly 100 goal contributions in 10 years. That's fucking brilliant. Fair play to him. You know, that's a good return for someone. And actually, if you look at towards the end of his career, you maybe look at the last 3 years or so of his career, he barely played and he barely contributed. So you then condense that into 7 years. And you look at then and you compare it to Kieran Dyer, and it's just like double what he produced, which you can't argue. But for me, and I apologise, I'm properly sniffled up at the moment. So if my voice is slightly off, I apologise. But from 92 or 93, from 93 to 96, so those 3 year period, for me, he was one of the, if not the best centre midfielder in the Premier League. And the goals, the contributions, the effect that he had on the team was outstanding. Some of the goals he scored, you know, we laud Lampard as one of the best centre midfielders for the fact that he would arrive in the box or shoot from distance and score great goals. Rob Lee was doing that before Lampard even kicked a ball in Premier League football. You know, he was doing that on a regular basis. There's arguments for a number of Newcastle players, but there's a big argument that Rob Lee should have played a lot more for England during that period. He was that good. And he almost created that attacking midfield role in terms of arriving late in the box and being that dynamic midfielder that would break the lines and just not stick to that centre midfield role. And I think Lee Clark played a big role in that. He wasn't in my top 5 and he wasn't this big outstanding centre midfielder, but again, like Gary Speed, he allowed the other player to really excel, and that's what allowed Rob Lee to play his absolute best. And some of the goals he scored were crucial goals, but some of them were outstanding goals that he put in for Newcastle. And I think Chris alluded to the fact of how he came to the club and all the stuff around what Kevin Keegan's talked about before. You know, that just adds to the flavour of how, you know, we've managed to get a player like Rob Lee to come up from London, talked about moving to Middlesbrough, and then he had the career that he did after Newcastle. There's a reason why, 30 plus years later, we're still talking about how good he is. That's the effect he had on the Newcastle United fans. So fair play to him. Great midfielder. A little bit like Chris, I probably didn't appreciate Rob Lee until he left the club, but that's equally partly because I was younger. And what I was going to say at the time, Chris, but I'll say it now, is that when I was a young lad, years old, and I was watching Newcastle United, I'd be looking at Andy Cole, I'd be looking at Peter Beardsley, I'd be looking at then David Ginola, Les Ferdinand, I'd be looking at all these standout players.
Yeah, that's probably what it is, you know, Pete. That is probably what it is, because I just focused solely on those players and didn't appreciate, because of my age, probably, those players who really, you know, did a job and maybe didn't get the plaudits.
Yeah, and that's it. Like, so they were household names, but they didn't hit the lights every week. But they would have big moments in the team, and that's why, you know, sometimes you don't see those players all the time in the job they do. I think football now, in the modern football, we evaluate all players really, really closely. So we now appreciate those players that don't do the jobs that other people do. And appreciate them. Back then you didn't, and that's probably why you didn't see Rob Lee in the light that maybe you did. And there's many others that were maybe the same, but I appreciated Rob Lee after he left the club, when I used to watch a lot of football back, a lot of 90-minute games back, and see the effect that he had, and that's why I appreciate what he did and how important he was. And as I talked about in the beginning, he set the standard for the likes of Gerrard and Lampard to be that attacking midfielder that we all know now as being a really, really important role. We look at what Bruno Gomes is doing at Newcastle, arriving late at the box, scoring goals from distance. He was doing that in the early 90s.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about, you know, when you're talking to Chris there about Chris potentially not realising how good a player he was because of the people that were surrounding him. And I think that also backs up, you know, potentially why he didn't get as many England caps as he did, because of all those other names at other clubs that sort of like overtook. But he should have had a hell of a lot more England caps. And obviously, you go on. He might not have had the geographical intelligence, but I tell you what, he didn't half know his way around the football pitch, Rob Lee. You look, you've mentioned it, Pete. He's passing and movement in that middle of the park. The timing to get on the end of the runs, to arrive at that box, that perfect sort of time, like Bruno did in the Leicester game, last season. That run, that timing to get on the end of it, it was like second nature to Rob Lee. He just knew how to do it, And the one thing that really, warms me in regards to Rob Lee as a player, full stop. He was with us when we were in the Championship, and he was an integral part of what Kevin Keegan laid down, that foundations that brought, what we loved in the 90s. And the fact that, he wasn't just bought for that one season to get us out the Championship as it is now. He was bought as, it's a bit like how Trippier and Bruno took that chance to, potentially getting relegated from the Premier League and not having that release clauses in their contract. He took a chance on coming to Newcastle, and boy, didn't half pay off for him. He looks back at the club. He's a club legend now. As he said, Pete, 10 years at the club. Yes, okay, towards the end of it, he wasn't featuring as much as he should have, really, in all fairness. Bobby Robson could have used him a hell of a lot more. But then, as you mentioned before, when you've got people like Gary Speed, and you've got, Kieran Dyer in that centre midfield role as well. And obviously, his legs weren't as fresh as he was when he first arrived at the club. And he was more of an understudy to those. And, someone to come off the bench to if we needed something that sort of fun. But, you can't fault the guy, full stop. Some of the games, the season when we got promoted and the last game of the season, it was 7-1 against Leicester. I think he got a hat-trick on the end of the season. It's just things like that stand out there. And, he's just a phenomenal player. And as I said, Alan Shearer's, he's got a lot of friends in football, but there's not many that he classed as close friends. And Rob Lee is one of his close friends. Yeah. And that developed from on the pitch, off the pitch, what he is as a guy, the relationship, to earn that sort of respect of Big Al, you've got to have a connection and on the pitch, not just off it as well. If he knows that you're giving your all for his club, because obviously remember it was Alan Shearer's club. It wasn't Rob Lee's club. He grew up down south. Obviously, at the end of the day, as I said, geographically intelligent, he was not. He thought Newcastle was closer than Middlesbrough, for Christ's sake. But, it was his club. You know what I mean? But he was, for predominantly his career, 10 years at the club. There's not many people who stay at a club long enough to get a testimonial, technically, nowadays. But he was one of them for Newcastle. And do you know what? Fantastic player. And, in other days, if he could make number one in some people's lists and stuff like that, you never know. He might still be number one in some people's lists. Not just us four. As I said, everyone's got opinions. Some people might think he's the best midfielder Newcastle have ever had, and that's all well and good. He's fantastic. But we've already touched on the fact that that's mine, Daz, and Pete's number two. That we've already touched on the fact that Chris didn't deem him worthy to be even in his top five. But that's just obviously Chris. But Chris, you're number two, and I can see that we've had a special poster put into the chat just specifically for. I really, really appreciate that, Daz. And it's just for the allegiance for Chris to turn. Look how he's like going through. And I go, quick, what do you do? But Chris, we thought we'd bring it back to your roots, mate. Okay, and you brought up Gary Speed.
Oh, here we go. That's it. Oh, there we go. No. You know what? I was dying to jump in when you were all talking about Gary Speed, and for me, Gary Speed ran my number one the closest. Gary Speed was in my all-time 11, and for me, Gary Speed, and I can't really add much more than what Pete said, because Pete described it absolutely fantastically, but the only thing I would add is that for me, Gary Speed was like the ultimate professional. Like, he did everything right, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch. Yeah. And I think Pete, Richie, you said it, didn't you? Saying that like he was one of Alan Shearer's best mates, and I think that says it all, really. Ultimate professional, someone you'd want in the trenches with you. And the big shame was, And I think Sir Bobby Robson spoke about this after he left, saying that, it made financial sense to let him go. A player, I think he was 34, 35 when we let him go. And I think he saw the money because Bobby, was Newcastle through and through. And he saw the money and thought, you know what, this would be good for the club. And I think he later admitted afterwards, I shouldn't have let him go. Because he went on, I think, and played 2 or 3 years for Bolton. And he was absolutely wonderful. Because Gary Speed, in many ways, could be kind of classed as like the like a modern day Ronaldo in terms of, even when he's 36, he's not really 36. He's got the body of like a 30-year-old, because he looked after himself so well, and he made sure that he was at the peak of his condition. So even when Gary Speed was 36, 37, he was probably still, body-wise, he was probably 30, 31, 32. So it's just a shame that we let him go to Bolton for such a low price. But yeah, absolutely fantastic player. You were talking earlier as well, lads, about Rob Lee, and you were saying, about his timing into the box, and people talk about, Frank Lampard in that vein. The way Gary Speed used to travel into the box, and with those headers, his timing was unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. And it's rare that you see a central midfielder who, within that 12-yard box, would almost be like another striker. He was that good in the air, and he wasn't particularly tall either. But Gary Speed, I think he was only like 5'11", 6 foot. I don't think.
Hey, hold on a second. That's tall. That's tall.
Well, no, I'm 5'11" myself. But
No,
I mean,
that's very tall.
Me too. Oh, bless you, Richie.
in terms of like scoring headers, you wouldn't expect somebody who'd be 5'11" to be so good in the air. I was going to mention an Everton player then, but I won't, because that'll just set myself up for the fall. But no, I mean, So yeah, I won't say any more about Gary Speed, but absolutely fantastic player. He scored the first Newcastle goal I ever saw live. So at my first ever game, Gary Speed scored the equaliser against Dynamo Kiev in the Champions League. And yeah, it was just, I just loved Gary Speed, and I'm not ashamed to admit this. When I remember exactly where I was when I found out, the terrible news about him, and I remember just burst out crying. I was absolutely gutted, because he was just Mr. Newcastle for me, even though I know he wasn't from Newcastle. I just classed him as like a real integral part of the club, and it's just such a shame that he's not with us now. But yeah, Gary Speed, it was an easy choice for me. He strolled into that top 5 for me.
Chris, did you say it was your first Newcastle game, a Champions League game?
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, Dynamo
Nice.
Kiev, and we won 2-1. Kiev went 1-0 up, and then Gary Speed equalised with a diving header, and then Shaver scored from the penalty spot.
Oh, class.
And it was that. Was it that night, or was it? No, the night before that was when I met Carl Court in Burger King.
Yeah, I remember that story.
Yeah. So yeah, and I had Carl Court on the back of my shirt, and I told him that, and you could tell he just didn't believe me, because everybody hated him. But I had Carl Court on my shirt, and he just wasn't having it. But I never had my shirt on me. I'd left it in the hotel. So yeah, shame.
So that's why he turned shit then, Chris. Man, come on.
Oh.
You know what the curse is? The curse of the boy on the back of the shirt. It ruins players.
If I'd had that shirt at Burger King, it might have been so different. So different.
Yeah. I still love the story about with that Bobby Robson was renowned for, with Carl Court. Obviously, he couldn't say Shola Amiobi, so he just called him Carl Court.
Oh yeah! Oh my God, there was a few players who did that too.
Yeah. You probably couldn't get away with that nowadays, could you?
No chance.
Right, it's that time, lads. Coming towards the end of the show, we'll probably got about 15 minutes there. We're all down to that all-important number 1 slot.
Yeah.
And I gave my reasons why I put him in number 3. And I know that it got mixed reviews in the chat, and obviously understand and stuff like that. As I said, I agree he could be this number 1 in a few years. But you all think that Bruno Guimaraes is the number one centre midfielder that Newcastle have ever had. So, Daz, I'll start with you. Why is that?
Why not? He's absolutely unreal. I know when we first started talking about him, it was Pete that brought it to our attention how good he was, and then like we started looking at clips of him, and he does look good. He links up well, but then he arrived in Newcastle, and he's just been a breath of fresh air. He can play in a number of different positions, and he's added goals to his game. He's even been talking about the weekend. He's been talking that Eddie Howe wanted him to score with his head. He scored with his head. Is there anything he can't do? He should be a starter for the Brazil squad, and I'll be supporting him in the World Cup. But he's absolutely unreal. I think he's going to be he's the player that we're going to base our team around for the next, I don't know, 10 years or so. And it's I think I said in the summertime, if we were able to bring in a player that's half as good as Bruno in the transfer market, we're laughing, like, because he's just absolutely unreal. Yeah, it's why we really built this show tonight. It's because of Bruno, and I'm delighted to pick him as my number one, and that's why I got his name on the back of my jersey as well. So yeah, Bruno for me, number one, and we have so much to look forward to from him in the future.
So, Daz, basically, if he ever turns shit, we can blame you for having his name on the back of your shirt.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah.
But the thing is, though, right? Bruno Guimaraes is no call. Caught, is he, Pete? You're on mute, mate.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was still.
Is that water running again? Do you need season tickets now, mate?
I was still shocked that Daz has got Bruno on the back of his shirt, because now I'm worried about Real Madrid calling.
Don't be worried, Pete, because I've good record. I've Shearer, I have Lauren Robert, and I had Bellamy on the back of my shirts, I think.
It's funny how you left the Givar shout though there, didn't you, mate?
No.
No, to be fair, that's a good list. Look, Bruno Guimaraes, he had to be my number one, and look, not for the generic reasons that we've talked about tonight. We can look at the goals and assists. Was it 7 goals, 1 assist, all the rest of it? Barely been at the club, but for me, and interestingly, and we'll be tagged in it, Loading Mag. I did a piece for BBC Sport that'll be out tomorrow, and it was asked the question: who would you rather out of Bruno Guimaraes and Bruno Fernandes? And I went Bruno Guimaraes, and there's a few reasons. For one, yes, he's not played a lot of games for Newcastle United. He's not been here very long, so why would he be my number one? Well, he's my number one because of the fact that he chose to take a chance with Newcastle United when he didn't have to, and he came to play with us when we were 19th in the Premier League, but not just to come in and play with us when we're 19th in the Premier League. Come in and single-handedly at times influence games that got us points. It's not easy to do. For all of the other players that we've talked about tonight, I think maybe Johan Cabaye is one that maybe played for Newcastle United at a lower point in the league. Most of those players were playing Champions League football and higher upper echelons of football. And when you play at that level, it's easier because you've got influence in the game. You've got influence to be able to be the one that gets the goals and assists and all the numbers that we've talked about tonight and the influence on games. He's playing for a team that was dog shit last season and made us better, ultimately, by the way in which he led. By example, he demands the best in training. He demands the best on the pitch. He demands the ball at every opportunity. He can play under pressure. You look at the stats, and I talked about this as well, and look, you alluded to it, Richie. You look at the stats that Carragher and Keane put on Monday night. They don't lie. You know, you've got players that are seasoned professionals and experienced in the Premier League, and he's outplaying them all. His technical ability is unbelievable. He's playing in a position that he didn't play in before he came to Newcastle United as the number 8, and he's excelling in that. And you know what? He's done that all within 10 months of playing for Newcastle United. He's still early on. And I think if he even just maintained what he's doing currently, he would eclipse a lot, majority, if not all, of the players that we've talked about if he stays at Newcastle United long enough. And he has the potential, like we've all said, to be the best, not just midfielder that's ever played for Newcastle United, but the best player that's ever played for Newcastle United. He's infectious. His personality, everything about him makes you want to love him. And he has turned this city of Newcastle upside down because everybody loves him and everybody appreciates him. And that isn't easy playing for a team that was in 19th position when he signed for the club. So for me, he has to be number one, because he has just done so much in such a little amount of time. And the window of him being to the level that we expect him to be is far greater than any of the other midfielders that we've talked about. He has the ability to smash that window and be one of the best players in the world.
Completely agree with you. You've pretty much reiterated everything I said to him. But obviously, I just stuck down the fact that it's literally because of how long he's been there. I want to say going forward, which, to be fair, before we went on there, you did say, look, I can understand your reason for putting him there. And it's nothing disrespectful to Bruno. It's just literally how long he's been there, and you want to see it continue consistency. That's it. But Chris, why was he number one for you, mate?
It's hard to follow Pete actually, because everything Pete was saying, I was like, yeah. No, mate. You absolutely described him to a T. I think Bruno isn't the normal, and this is what makes him special for me. Bruno isn't the normal type of player that I'm drawn to. Like, I'm normally drawn to a St. Maximin, I'm normally drawn to a Ben Arthur, Robert, Ginola, and I've just been drawn in by Bruno. Like, he's just like captured my imagination. I look forward to seeing Bruno play, and as soon as I don't see Bruno in that starting 11, I'm just like, oh no. And to be fair, I looked back at my 5 once I picked it. And, I picked Gini Van Alden, even though he'd only been in Newcastle for a year. And I based that off what he's done at Liverpool. And I think it'll be the same with Bruno. Now, fingers crossed, Bruno's here for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. But even if he's not, I think Bruno is destined for huge things. Whether he's at Newcastle, which hopefully he is. But if he was to move elsewhere, I think he'll be one of the top 5 midfielders in world football in the next 2 or 3 years, in my opinion. He's that good. You see, every time you watch highlights of him, he feels like the new era Kevin De Bruyne. And I know that's a massive thing to say, but he just feels like that type of midfielder who's got everything.
It's not. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
for me,
he's got everything.
For me, he has the ability. Like, I'll ask you a question: is there another midfielder in the Premier League outside that traditional top 6 that you could say could play for any of the top 6 and start every single game and be one of the, if not the best player in every single one of those teams? I can't name one. But I could name him. He could play for every single one, including Man City. He could play for every single in midfield in that top 6 and be the best player in that team. That's how good he is.
Well, if you just think, Pete, just off the top of my head, you've got Tottenham, you've got the likes of Bentancur, Højbjerg. I'd take Bruno over them. You've got Arsenal, you've got Xhaka and Odegaard. I'd take him over them. You've got Man United, who've got Fred and McTominay. I'm not even going to insult by asking that question. You've got Liverpool, who've got Fabinho. You've got Henderson, Thiago. He'd get in amongst them, no problem. You've got Man City. You've got Rodri. You've got who would be the other Gundogan.
Yeah.
He'd certainly be fighting amongst them, if not displace one of them. I'm trying to think who the other. Oh, Chelsea. You've got Jorginho and Kovacic. He'd get a game over them.
Don't worry.
Yeah, and so even just looking at those top 6, he walks into all of those central midfields. If we were to put Bruno up for sale tomorrow, taking everything else out of account, every single team would be in for him, and every single team, if we said, "Oh, we want 100 million," I think they put the money on the table and go, "There you go." Just purely based off of what we've seen. Now, Richie, just to defend you here a little bit, mate, I can totally see why you've put him third, because to be fair, like, we are getting really excited over him, and he hasn't played all that many games for Newcastle. I think myself and Daz and Pete, we've probably put him in based on the fact that he's kind of like a certain bet. He's kind of a player where he's going to do it. Hopefully he does it at Newcastle, but there's no reason why he can't become one of, if not the best midfielders in the Premier League. And that's why I've got him number one, purely for potential and purely because of what we've seen. I mean, I know it's not a huge deal, but Roy Keane coming out saying he's a complete midfielder. Roy Keane doesn't throw out comments like that. He doesn't throw out willy-nilly comments like that. And for him to say that,
especially with him being a Newcastle player, and the grievances he's got about Newcastle.
Yeah, and also, by the way, a fantastic central midfielder, which he was, and he's coming out and going, yeah, he's superb. That says it all for me. Yeah, 100 too cheap. Yeah, Daniil, you're right. That would be kind of to just start the conversation, because let's be honest,
that's the auction.
Well, it's like what we touched on it the other day, didn't we? We touched on it the other day. West Ham were looking for 150 million for Declan Rice. Yeah. That means Newcastle should be going for technically way more of that, because Bruno, hands down, as the stats proved on Monday Night Football, he was head and shoulders above him.
Did we not see those stats? Yeah, you could argue one season, but I guarantee you, this is a big statement from me. I guarantee you look at the stats between now and the end of this season, and he will top Declan Rice again. There is no doubt about it. He is a much better player. And if they're demanding 150 million for Declan Rice, I would hate to see how much we would offer or we would want for him. And you know what? The difference between us and West Ham is that we don't need to sell. We don't need to sell any one of our players.
Nope.
That's the key. And so, look, Real Madrid, Liverpool, Man City, they could all ask the question.
Auction is on here.
Look, Dunel, Ian, Lisa. Lisa's about right. Hold on, you got Pedri at Barcelona at 21 or 20 years old, just signed a contract with a $1 billion release clause. For me, Pedri he can't even lace Bruno Guimaraes' shoes. So if he's got a $1 billion release clause, hell, why should we do the same? And there's no one that can pay the money that would get Bruno Guimaraes out of the club. But the only reason we'd let it go is through good grace of our ownership.
Do you know what? Do you know what I think? I think the most fitting release clause would be for Bruno if we'd have put it in. The wealth of Sheikh Mansour, just to take the piss. You can have Bruno, but it's going to bankrupt you at the same time.
I think they're worth like 26 billion, something like that.
Yeah.
Why not? We don't need to sell him.
No,
you're right.
Rich, I hope I'm not treading on your toes here, mate. I've literally just downloaded. Weirdly, I saved the picture earlier today, and I was meant to send it to you before the show, and I completely forgot. But while we're talking about Bruno, obviously the clue is in the title. I downloaded the picture. So this was the picture I saw earlier today. Yeah. So that's probably the one you were referring to, anyway. But see all those players who've been mentioned.
See, the interesting thing is we've just compared Rice and Bruno. Rice obviously beats him in the possessions won, but you look, we're talking 0.4 of a possession.
Yeah,
that's it. He's pretty much technically, you might as well be joint top with Declan Rice on that. But the other one, right? There's clear daylight between every single other category there.
Yeah,
and it's no coincidence. All of those players are in the top six. All of those players, bar Declan Rice, they all play for top six clubs. And Bruno Guimaraes was doing that. As Pete said, he joined us in 19th position. And I think Eddie Howe made it clear, didn't he? He said, listen, there's no clauses. There was no promises. It was just he wanted to come to the club. He wanted to get us out the mess. And he knew that, we were an exciting prospect. And he's come and he's performed. The stats don't lie, do they? At the back end of last season, we were a top four club. From January onwards, we were performing like a top four club, and we've started the season like that to a degree. A lot of people were flapping, getting a bit nervous because we had loads of draws and stuff like that. But I won't go into it again. But we've had some difficult fixtures and we've been missing some key players, and all of a sudden, all of those key players are coming back, and we're playing against the likes of Fulham, and we're playing against the likes of Brentford, and we're turning them over quite comfortably. Let's not forget, this is the same
Chris, I think
Brentford
that's why a lot of Newcastle fans, when all the national media have been turned around and said, "Oh, Newcastle, should be expecting more." They're having a really bad start of the season. Newcastle fans weren't worried about that. We knew we had. You look at the games and the results. Some of the places that we went to was quite a hard start. Brighton away is a difficult game. Wolves has typically been a difficult game to go away. Liverpool's always a difficult place to go to. And you look at all of those, we could have beat Wolves on a different day if decisions had gone our way. We could have got 3 points at Anfield. And bear in mind, we didn't have a lot of our main stars against Liverpool as well. But you look at those stats there. That's just been brought up. Sorry, Chris. If you look at those stats there, you look at the categories, right? Declan Rice is narrowly above him in possessions won. Rodri is narrowly behind him in carries, right? But on the other 3 topics, he's head and shoulders above every single other midfielder, pretty much in the big six there, right? But not just that, he hasn't played. He's missed games this season as well. How much would those stats potentially be increased if he'd played in the games at Wolves, for example, where you're going to dominate the midfield and stuff like that? It's mind blowing.
You look at that list, Richie, and it's a who's who of the best defensive midfielders in the Premier League. When you look at Rodri, when you look at the way they talk about Declan Rice, when you look at Jorginho, when you look at Bentancur and Højbjerg, the way they talk about him. McTominay, I don't know how the fuck he managed to get on that list, but anyway, you got Fabinho. That's the who's list of top defensive midfielders in the Premier League, and he obliterates the lot. And so that stat would have pissed off, and I know for a fact it did, would have pissed off a lot of clubs, particularly West Ham, because the way in which they laud their defensive midfielders, their midfielders, in the way that they're the best in the world, that they do this, they do that, they do the other. And Bruno Guimaraes has come in and within 10 months he's just gone, fuck you lot, I'm the best. I'm the best at what I do. And you know what? I'll show it every game that I play. And that's what I talked about in terms of his infectiousness, the way that he demands the best. Get that bleep out. I don't like the way in which he demands the best. And it was said very early on, he demands the best in training, he demands the best on the pitch. And he is that one player that makes a huge difference to us. We love Alisson Maximin, we love Callum Wilson, we love those players that make that difference. Alexander Isak, but Bruno Guimaraes, for me, he's the top. He's the best because he makes the difference in all areas. He does everything at midfielder you would want in a midfielder. He does everything. There is nothing in that midfield role that he can't do.
Tell you what. Sorry, go on, Chris. Go on,
I was just going to say dead quick, mate, and not to mention, somebody mentioned it in the chat, and it's a valid point to mention. Not only, is he performing on the pitch, and that's as a 6 and an 8, because he from game to game he can change 6 and an 8. Not only that, he's integrated himself into the city. He's learned English now. He's conducting interviews in English, which is absolutely fantastic. So he's embraced the culture and everything. And Eddie Howe can't speak highly of him every time, saying he's an ultimate professional. He wants to win all the time. He supports his teammates. So not only is he a fantastic player in terms of his stats, but we've also got a fantastic man as well. We've also got a fantastic person. And since Eddie Howe's come in, he said it's not just about the player and it's not just about the stats and the figures. It's about bringing in the right personality, and Bruno is that. Bruno is all of that, and that's what makes it even more great. The fact that we've got this player.
Just even going on that one, just quickly, mate. The fact that he loves the fact that his son's going to be born Geordie. He mentioned it the other day. That's how much he loves the area, and it doesn't. You see some overseas player. When their wives are expecting, they take them back to the home country to have the child born. So obviously that's their country. It doesn't bother him. He loves Newcastle.
Richie, there's a point there because there's a question from Adam Bailey as well. Is anyone worried that Bruno may not play this weekend due to his partner ready to have the baby? So, but I wasn't until I saw that comment. So. It's a decent point. It's his firstborn as well.
Been talk about that today. And to be fair, I think he says it. He says it in one of his interviews after the game on Saturday that his baby's born at some point this week. And as soon as I heard that, I did worry. I thought, he might play because it's a big game, but you always see even the best players, they tend to miss it when it's the birth of their first child. And the longer that it's been, and we're getting to Thursday tomorrow, and it's still not come, it's still not arrived yet. I genuinely do worry about the fact that he might not be playing. That is a little bit of a concern, for sure.
Chris, I know you've got to shoot off, mate. I want to say thank you very much for your top 5 before obviously we finish the show, mate. But all good and well, and we'll see you at the end of the week, mate.
Nice one. Thanks, boys.
See you, Chris.
Mate.
Take care. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Just to finish off on the Bruno chat before I get on to my number 1, could you see Bruno? Obviously, we obviously presumably stays at Newcastle, and fingers crossed, touch wood. We all think hope he will. Could you see him replacing Kieran Trippier as captain when he retires?
It's like you've read my article already.
That's what you said. No, to be fair, I haven't seen it, so you can doubt that. I haven't seen that.
Look, I have to squeeze it into 150 words, so it's like it's not what I want to talk about, because I could talk about him all day. But I've just said the way in which he plays, it's captain-like. And in my first draft, I said if it wasn't for Trippier, for me, he would be captain of Newcastle United because of the way in which he plays. Like, he is that influential player at the club that everybody looks up to. Everybody looks up to him. Like, he's the one player that when he takes a shot and he scores a goal, that Callum Wilson can't be mad at. Like, it doesn't matter whether they score, whether they miss. Callum Wilson can be mad at anyone. He can be mad at Almiron. He can be mad at Willock. He can be mad at Joe Linton. But when Bruno Cabaye takes a shot and he scores a goal, fair play. He just goes up and congratulates him. It's that, and it's the little things that I've noticed about how players react to him, like in certain moments, and he has that pull, he has that influence already.
It's exactly what you mean, Pete. Because if you go at the Murphy's goal on Saturday, when Murphy scored, you could just see the look on Callum Wilson's face. He says, "You better acknowledge that I actually set it up for you behind when you get back to change, dude, lad."
But you only really gave him the assist because he got bollocked by Jason Tyndall because he didn't release the first one when he went through a goal, and he should have put Miggy in. So the next one that he got, he put him in, and Murphy scored. So we felt that he had to, otherwise he'd have probably took the shot himself. But if that was Bruno Cabaye, he wouldn't feel bad about it because he knows the influence he has in that club already, in the city, with the fans. He knows he's the best player at the club. Yeah,
totally agree.
I'd like to see how okay, look, we're going to have Trippier for another few years. He could do his job as a captain. His English would have to improve as well, and he'd have to. It'll take time as well before I could see him in that role. But yeah, if he sticks around, if one of the things that keeps him here, definitely give it to him. But then there's the whole Botman debate as well. Maybe again he will become vocal as well in time when he settles in a bit more. But that's a possibility.
I think Botman's his personality is really starting to come out already. Because I know we're just drifting a little bit, but if you go back to the Fulham goal, and he absolutely rollicks Jamal Lewis. If you actually watch the highlights again, Sven Botman goes berserk, and it's one of the only times I've ever seen him like really lose his cool but you could tell how much that clean sheet meant to him, and he really, really wanted to deliver that for the club and the fans and stuff like that. So he's starting to get that confidence a bit more now. Do you know what I mean? I don't think you really look back at it. You can't really fault Jamal Lewis. He hasn't played many competitive games. He's still getting up to speed and stuff like that. So give him a little bit of due. But you got to admit, Botman's starting to really find his feet in Newcastle. And when you start seeing reactions like that, you know that person's at home now in the club, and he's getting his feet in there and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely on that one. Right. Since it was all about Bruno, we've talked about Bruno. Should we touch on my number 1 or not? Oh,
go for it.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, And you have said it, there was like off air and stuff like that. You couldn't really comment because you didn't see enough of this player at Newcastle. And it's probably because I'm the eldest, gaffer on the channel now, do you know what I mean? And I was lucky enough I was brought up with him. I went to my first game when I was 4-year-old. And this was, this is when he was like brought into the Newcastle fold. And it's like how young fans are now looking at people like ASM and Bruno, those flair players. Mine up until obviously Alan Shearer didn't join until when I was 16-year-old. So I was starting to that's a different era for me. Remembering Newcastle, my two favourite players growing up. One was David Ginola. I just thought he was absolutely phenomenal. But obviously, we're not talking wingers or influential players or who's your best player. This guy was my idol. I wanted to be him when I was like playing football and when you go on all those coaching schools and stuff like that. And this guy to me, I think what makes me really happy with the way that the new like board and stuff and the way the club is obviously with not having to worry about money. We hopefully will never ever have to sell talent like this ever again if we develop the right and if they can deliver. There's a lot of promise about Elliot Anderson potentially going forward. He was nicknamed the Geordie Maradona when he was at Bristol Rovers and stuff like that. This person was he was talked about in the same breath as Maradona on occasions. They got on really well because they had good social habits and stuff as well when they grew up a bit older as well. But for me, my best centre midfielder of all time for Newcastle was the one and only Paul Gascoigne. He just epitomised everything that, I like, the creativity, the work ethic for a young lad. His technical ability was just phenomenal. The goal that he scores like that against Crystal Palace, where he puts it in the stanchion, and it's just seriously, Newcastle fans didn't get to see the best of him. The season before he moved to Spurs, he was the PFA Young Player of the Year. He was also in the PFA Team of the Year as well. And we never really got to see the best of him at Newcastle. And to be fair, he would have loved to have, stayed at Newcastle for his whole career. But, finances at Newcastle at the time, we were a completely different club then. We're talking about the days before Sir John Hall's money when he set up the entertainers up. We weren't, great off the pitch back then. And, and Spurs came along, offered him what was a good deal back then. Do you know what I mean? And, you start seeing him the way he played on at Spurs and then with England. And then he went up with Lazio and stuff like that. And then, he had these major injury issues that all stemmed from that semi-final at Wembley for Spurs when he ruptured his knee ligaments and stuff like that. And I don't think he ever got that back after he left, but it's a shame that we didn't see all that talent that he possessed in a black and white shirt for longer, because he was one hell of a player. And I know you'll all know what Gazza was like, after he left Newcastle, which is probably what you were all brought up watching. The times when he was at Spurs, when he was at Lazio, at England, and Everton, and Rangers, and Borough, and all that sort of stuff. But he was capable of magic on his day. He's gone. He's gone.
That's for Chris.
No. You even talk about he wasn't really he's still at Rangers and he was getting all the jip at that, and they all told him they were going to kick him off the park in Euro '96. And the everyone knows down as the dentist chair celebration after that phenomenal goal where he lifted the ball over Colin Hendry and then passed the ball past Andy Gorham, and his teammate for Rangers, they'd been who they were all saying we're going to break his legs and stuff like that in the game. And he's just, but even off the pitch, we know he was like a troubled soul, which they always say a lot of these genius maverick players tend to be. Sometimes, unfortunately, you look at George Best, you look at Maradona, Gazza falls into that category as well. Unfortunately, when he was at London, the big night lights and being away from the area took its toll, and sometimes he fell down the wrong rabbit hole occasionally and stuff like that, and it did taint him a little bit and stuff like that. But as a football talent, he's just everything you want as a Newcastle fan. Looking back at one of your own, the things he could do on a pitch. He was like a little wizard. He really was. He's just hands. As I said, I wanted to be him when I was growing up. Do you know what I mean? He was my idol. And just phenomenal. Seriously, I can't say enough words about how good Gazza was.
Well, I can see that, Richie. You just kind of gone through his autobiography there. It's a great testament to him. I'm sure Gazza will be in touch. But for me, I don't have Gazza on my list because I don't remember Gazza playing for Newcastle. I started supporting Newcastle when I was 11, so he was gone at that stage. He was well gone. And for me, it was Gazza at Spurs and the infamous game against Notts Forest in the cup. That sticks in my mind, and then of course on to Lazio and Italian football, and on to Rangers and Middlesbrough and Everton and a few more after that. But yeah, absolutely unreal player. If I'd seen him play for Newcastle, he would be on my list as well. But I only put those that I've seen play during my time, I suppose, as a supporter. But I can see why you picked him. Yeah,
that's understandable. Do you know what I mean? That's the thing. We've all picked our top 5 on who we've seen play for Newcastle. There's potentially you go back through the years and there might be some that people might go, why haven't you mentioned? We haven't seen these people play, which is why, as Daz touched on, you couldn't put Gazza in, the team, and that's all well and good. You know what I mean? And then everyone respects people's opinions on that. Like, Pete, what did you think of Gazza?
Like probably a lot that are in the chat and just in general. I'm not old enough to remember Gazza playing for Newcastle United. So for me, it's very hard to talk about him from a Newcastle point of view. But I look at, how he was performing sort of 95, 96, particularly, with England. That's how I remember him playing for England so well. A little bit in 1990. It was my brother more so that really appreciated him in 1990, but 96 for me, when he was, we should have won the Euros. It's simple as that. And I always think to myself, even at that point, I always think, why didn't we sign him? Why didn't Keegan bring him back? A Newcastle boy bringing him back at that point where we wanted to win the league. Someone with that little bit of stardust. Keegan, of all managers, would have been able to tame him, in my opinion, and get the best out of him and be able to hold him down. But that's for me. That's just for me. But as a player, you're absolutely right. He had absolutely everything to be the very, very best in the world. And at times he probably was, and maybe he didn't get the recognition for it. But it's a shame that other things affected him and how people see him now. Really, you get the Geordies and maybe one or two others, certainly abroad, that appreciate Gazza, but not in the way that he should be around the world for how good he actually really was. Yeah,
totally agree. And do you know what? It brings to an end a fantastic show. Opinions of who, as we said, we saw that tweet at the weekend about is Bruno Newcastle's best ever player. It goes to show how hard it was to fit him as one of the best centre midfielders Newcastle ever had. But it was telling that there was, out of all the midfielders Newcastle could have had, and we could have chose from, there was only 2 players that made all 4 of our lists. Bruno, obviously, and I think this is a testament to the man that we all mentioned when we spoke about him, and the other person was Gary Speed. So, lads, we've done a lot longer than we thought we were going to do, because it's just passionate about how much we love this club and all the players that have played over all the time while we've been following Newcastle. But I think I'd like to say thanks to everyone for watching and staying with us. It's been some fantastic viewers stay with us all night. Their opinions in the chat have been fantastic as well. Whether you've agreed with our points of view or disagreed or had completely different opinions to them, as we said before, that's what it's all about. But thank you very much for choosing to join us on a Wednesday night. We always appreciate everyone tuning in. And also the people who can't watch it live and want to watch back on catch up, we've really enjoyed it. And I was just going to pass it on you because I know exactly what you're going to do. Go on, Daz.
I'll wait.
No, go on.
No, I was going to say, yeah, we have to say what's coming next.
Exactly. I know. You just don't give me a chance to finish, do you?
And I wanted to, there's one or two questions as well, or comments that we
Go on
should
then, mate,
mention
go
as well. No, so first of all, we should say that away days is coming, and on Friday night, and there might even be a bit of a change to the lineup that then is advertised on screen there now. Tell us a little.
Yeah. There is. So we've got Talk of the Devils joining us, who have joined us in previous seasons for away days, but we've got a huge podcast joining us on Friday for a short period. Saeed TV, who are a massive Man United podcast, well over 50,000 subscribers. Saeed's agreed to join us for away days. He's actually seen a little bit of what we do and really likes the work that we do at Loaded Man Game UFC. So he's going to join us for a short period and talk all things Newcastle. So make sure you're there for that one. So it'll be a great one. So we've got a double whammy. We've got Talk of the Devils and Side TV who will be joining us for that one. So looking forward to it.
Nice one, Pete. We also got on a reaction show on Sunday night as well, so stay tuned for that. I think the moment is down for 8 o'clock on Sunday night. May change, but that is our current slot for the reaction show. Then there's a few things that come up in the chat as well. One from Tom Lynch, and we were going to check this out as well. The Darren Eales interview on Radio Newcastle. Maybe check that out. But he's Tom's indicating that he's interested in coming on some Newcastle fan channels, so we'll reach out at some stage and try and get him on. So we'd love that. Also, there was news from Simon there that the Loaded hoodies are going to become available soon. So looking forward to seeing that ourselves and maybe getting some of those. So that would be nice. So nice for the winter. And Russell is where it says he's got his salmon pink Loaded t-shirt. And there's a cup on the way. Nice one, Russell. Also, there was a comment as well. Adam alerted us to the fact that Martial might maybe missing for the Newcastle game, so that would be interesting. And when we talked, there's a few about how does Bruno get overlooked by Fred.
Well,
at least
to be fair, how is Joe Linton overlooked for Fred?
Yeah, I'm paying him off.
There's actually a really clear reason for that, and it's maybe what not a lot of certainly Newcastle fans will be aware of. But the current manager for Brazil was actually the club manager for Fred when he was in Brazil, and they've got a really good relationship, which is why he prioritizes Fred over a lot of other midfielders. So when Fred has had his awful spell at Man United and had really poor moments, been on the bench, all the rest of it, that's why when it comes to internationals, he's in and he starts a lot of the games. And that's why Bruno Guimaraes at 60, 70, 75 minutes comes on. I don't agree with it. You know, if you want to win the World Cup, you play Bruno Guimaraes. It's as simple as that. Because whenever he comes on, he has moments, whether he scores or he gets an assist. He has a brilliant moment. But it goes back to that, even like that Gareth Southgate priority, where you stop prioritising players, not over their ability, but over your relationship with them. It doesn't work for me.
Listen, and the last one I'll put up is Lisa wants to know what age we all are. What you can get that your guesses in the comments for that one. But that is it on the comments. Back to you, Richie, to close out the show.
No, I just want to reiterate, thank you very much, as I said before, for everyone to tune in and just to discuss what a fantastic time Newcastle is at the minute, really, and do you know what I mean? And also the highlights of what we grew up with as well as kids and stuff, like a little bit different what we normally go for. But as I said, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for Daz, Pete and Chris for joining us and being fully loaded tonight again, 2 nights in a row. And we look forward to seeing everybody on Friday for away days. I think it'll be, I don't know if it'll be Pete and Chris or Pete and whoever, but it'll be another fantastic show as it always is every single week. So we look forward to seeing you all on Friday night. So from me, good night, Daz and Pete. You doing the how button? Are you doing it or not, Daz, or not? Or am I doing it?
I did that one. Yeah.